Okay, well, let us start. And
Okay.
let me start with just a typical or announcement. And I'll just need to share the screen for a short time. So I just want to tell you that this is a part of the what we call it open symposium. And we actually created that, I think, almost like a half a year ago. So anyone who wants to present or organize, better to say organize something, because I'm not presenting today much, I'm organizing. But sometimes it could be presentation, sometimes it can be workshop. And the reason I'm sharing this page, and I can send you this page to the chat, because you can write it down, and I'll just go and explain that basically this is the place where you can sign up for organizing sorry, event for the next event or in the future event. And the way how it's done, you can see it's organized by date when you want to do it. By the way, you don't need to do it in 11 o'clock Eastern, actually daytime, which is not even, right now it's Eastern Standard Time. So I need to change that. So then who is a sponsor of event? Who is organizing it, basically? Topic, brief description, what it's about. You see, initially we started with no description, and then we realized that its description is needed. You can actually look at the descriptions. This is, you see, getting, oops, we need to check. And type of the format, it could be see workshop, somebody did workshop, like Christy did workshop. Then platform, it could be my platform or your platform, and then later it will be, hopefully it will be recordings about this, and you can put any comments. So this is how it works. And the reason one is crossed out is the ones that were in the past. And I need to cross out this one because it's also in the past. And this is where we're right now. So whoever wants to like be next, or you may be not next, but maybe you can say, I want to present in February or in April or May, whatever. You can put any date and put time if it's different from 11. And you can put name and so on and so forth. So feel free to do it at any time. And so everybody is welcome. And if you have any questions about that, it's a time to ask. If you have questions how to organize, and I think Melissa organized, people who been here, I think Brian organized that, some event, Melissa organized, Anna organized, of course, I organized. So Amy and Dilipa, feel free to, there is no peer pressure, you don't need to do that, but if you have something, don't be shy, you can organize, and we will help you to spread the word about this for the Facebook, and so everybody's welcome. So I just want to tell you, yes, Anna, do you have a question or comment?
We started doing that with so-called one-time events, which were not in any schedule. We didn't have any plans. Like it was just all in the air. Like we organized like a talk with Dina Zaretskaya about when the war started in Russia, about dialogue and whether you can have dialogue with somebody who is your enemy and things like that. And so we decided on this format because it's roughly so far every 2 weeks on a Tuesday. And so you can just we can put the dates and you can pick a date if you want to, something like that. It's just a little bit more structure for people to kind of see what can they do.
On another hand, it didn't work, like Tuesday didn't work for Brian, I remember, correct me if I'm wrong. So Brian did it on Friday. So there's no, it's on one hand, it's nice to have one kind of regular basis just because people have expectations. We do it every 2 weeks, but on the other hand, it might not work. And more important than things happen rather than it to some kind of pre-existing structure. And so feel free to join us to organize something or not organize. That's fine as well. It's not just you must do that, but just it's another. By the way, feel free to spread it to among your friends, what to join or to create interesting events. I'm thinking about more events. It's not about presentation; it's events, and welcome. Today I'm trying to create this event, and I'm still in the air how to organize that, because this is not something that I'm going to present. I want to create discussion about something that I came an interesting problem, but I'm actually would like to learn many things from you, what you think about that, and maybe even some interesting examples and so on and so forth. So for that, because of that reason, maybe it's a good idea to introduce each other. And so it will be easier to talk. And I think thanks, Dilipa, for starting this introduction. You can feel free, Dilipa, to add anything. Like you're from Sri Lanka, like what's your interests, whatever you want to say about yourself, Dilipa, if you want to add something. Yes, nice to see you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, hi. Yeah, so we, myself and my husband, we started a democratic school 2 years ago. We started amidst COVID, really. So it has been a slow cooking sort of progression, I would say, because the schools got few episodes of closures and things like that. And I'm not sure whether you've heard in that part of the world, but Sri Lanka is going through what an unprecedented economic crisis, they say. Can you hear me? Or is it yeah? Okay. So if you're familiar with the story of Lebanon, it's pretty similar. So there was a time that we didn't have fuel, so people were really stuck at home, you couldn't get anywhere. So again, schools closed, etc. So it has been a challenging couple of years. We are going to be 2 years old end of January. Yeah, so that's Sri Lanka's first and only democratic school that we started. Yeah, wow. So that's what I do.
Thank you. So interesting. Oh, you're muted, Eugene.
Thank you and welcome. Thanks a lot. Okay, well, next on my screen is Amy. So Amy, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Amy Santos. I'm a graduate student at University of Delaware. This is my second year. My research interests are pedagogy and children's literature. And I'm just very curious about all of the topics that we're doing in the Edu Club. So whenever I can make it, I pop it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Amy. And just to make sure that Delaware is in the United States, it's on the East Coast, and just to make sure that situate that because not even people in the United States, not everybody knows where is Delaware, and actually some people think that it's some kind of drink. I was in California. People think that they said no, Delaware is not a state; it's a kind of a drink. There was some debates at the Trader Joe, by the way.
If it's an solace to Amy, I know Delaware is not a state. I know it is in the United States.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Melissa, you are next on my screen with this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Bradford. I teach at DePaul University in educational leadership. That's in Chicago, Illinois, which is the United States. I started a democratically run school, a Sudbury school, back in 1997. That school eventually closed. I tried to start another one. That kind of floundered for a couple of years. And then ultimately in 2008, I started Tallgrass Sudbury School, and that one is still going strong, and it's in the Chicago suburbs.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Well, next is Brian.
So I am a high school teacher in Pennsylvania, kind of a semi-rural school district. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Delaware, and I'm on sabbatical this year, so that affords me the time to be here in this meeting. And I'm in a graduate program there, and my research interests are how people operate in contexts of bureaucratic institutions. And Eugene is my advisor.
Oh,
Thanks, Brian. Sorry, I just switched to instead of keeping that. Okay, Anna, you're next.
okay. I'm Anna Marjanović-Shane, originally from a country that does not exist anymore, Yugoslavia, but from a part that's now called Serbia. And I am an independent scholar who worked several universities. I used to teach at the University of Delaware also, and maybe in the future too. I'm interested in dialogic pedagogy and democratic education, and that's it for me for now. And Eugene, you're next.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, my name is Eugene Matusov. I'm originally from a country that doesn't exist, which is Soviet Union. And physically, I'm right now in Philadelphia, which is Pennsylvania, also on the East Coast, nearby Delaware, and where I work, actually, University of Delaware. My interest is in dialogic, democratic dialogic education. I stopped using the word pedagogy, which I used to. And for about maybe 10 years, maybe now more than 10 years, I'm kind of engaged myself into democratic education, but at the level of higher education at the university. And at the beginning of this time, trying to learn what does it mean, democratic education, I was kind of informing, enriching, I don't know how to call it, educating myself about what's going on at the democratic education at the K-12 levels. And I met a lot of democratic education educators, including Melissa. I think we met, I don't even know how we met, Melissa. That's an interesting question. I think we met some kind of.
We met at AERA. I had taken a class at DePaul on Bakhtin, and I had done research and I found out about dialogic pedagogy, and we had read an article in my class by you and Anna, and then so at AERA there we were going to have a dinner, and I found out about it, so I met you then.
Interesting, because kind of for me, for my kind of false memory, of course, it's you were more related with democratic education, but it's interesting. Of course, you're both, but it's interesting how my memory, because probably we met also on democratic education venues, and that's how I remember that. So interesting. Anyway, so now about this event today that I'm still thinking how to organize that. Let me share the screen and go from that. I'm using for the first time in my life, I'm using this Google Slides rather than PowerPoint. And the reason for that, because I really would like us to engage, to work on that together. So it's like, look how I position that. It's a civil disobedience and democratic education, Eugene Matusov and you. So, and it's not actually a presentation. The whole slides are for us to start the conversation. That's why I put you as well as co-authors of that. Whether or not you want it or no, just kidding about that. So the reason I'm switching to slides because I want to share the link with you so you can actually start checking it all the slides. while we were discussing them, and I hope you will be able to do this. It's actually says slide 1, but I don't know. Okay, let me share it because I never used that. If you are familiar with that, and let me know if I need to do something different. Okay, I can see that somebody joined that already. And who is that? Amy. Thanks, Amy. You are great. Actually, I'm so glad that. Okay, and who is it me? No, this is not me. Okay. Okay, this is okay. Anonymous. Now we have anonymous people who called anonymous. Okay, good. I see Anna. Okay, good. So anyway, first of all, maybe let me tell you what I think before we start, what I think about democratic education, because I was just working on an article that hopefully will be published in January, if everything goes in the right way, in a special issue in the Journal of Dialogic Pedagogy, that special issue organized by Anna and another scholar from Brazil about democracy and dialogue. It's not exactly the theme, but more, this is how I understood the theme. And I wrote there several articles for that special issue, but I wrote also conclusions. And in conclusions, I tried to figure out what does it mean democratic education as policy. Policy, it's kind of many understanding of this word. Like what does it mean democratic as a term? And I found, I think, 5 different understanding of this, how people use the word democratic education. And some of them use a kind of civic education, some used as like making better society, is education that creates democracy. It's kind of prepares children, or children could be students, to participate in democratic society and so on and so forth. But that's not how I'm thinking about this democratic education. I'm thinking about in 2 ways, which is related but not the same. One way, it's in democratic education in which students specifically, but not only students, it's educators there as well, participate in the democratic decision-making about how to organize education. Like they may decide like many organizational issues, as well as how to relate to each other and so on and so forth. They kind of creating like small, what is called small scale society, democratic society. And that's one way to understand that. Another way to understand that, it's thinking about that education is self-education, in which actually each person making recognized as a final authority for their own education in terms of making decisions about that, to engage in education, not to engage in education, or to study, and so on and so forth. So these two types of understanding, this is how I'm using that for this kind of issue that I'm going to present to you. This is how I understand that. Which creates an interesting problem, like, wow, why even need to have this civic, why to have civic disobedience? What's the problem? And for that, I'm switching to the slideshow. It works. Oh, wow, cool. Okay. So what's the problem? And let me tell you what's the problem there. So democratic governance, and we're talking about now democratic governance. So the first type of understanding that I was talking about, that kind of requires each participant to accept and obey democratically accepted or chosen decisions and rules and whatever, even if you disagree with them. Because if you don't do that, the democratic governance is impossible. It's basically, if by democracy you mean only you follow only decisions and rules that you like, and ignore other decisions that you don't like, that they were not chosen by that society, it means there is no democracy. And it's rather difficult to accept that you need to if you try to convince other people to do something, at the end of the day, you with maybe you convince some, but not either majority or all people or whatever. You failed. You have to live with that, and you need to accept that and willingly to subordinate yourself to decisions that or ideas or whatever that you completely disagree with, or completely or not completely. It depends. And you couldn't find, like, if you didn't find a compromise even, because sometimes it's possible to find a compromise, but what if you cannot find a compromise? Or even if you find compromise, it's still uncomfortable because exactly you're compromising, which means a level of discomfort about that, because it's not exactly what you think is good. I mean, it could be some finding a common solution, that could be fine, because in this case, everybody happy. But it's not always, democracy implies that it's not always that can happen. Because other than that, if it always could happen, you don't need democracy. You don't need power. Because power implies imposition. That word krasi, demo means people, and krasi means power. Like aristocracy. It's a power of nobility. Okay, so this is one part of the kind of issue. The second part of issue is about acknowledging that people have personal responsibility and subordination to the rules, even democratic rules in democratic decision, is not excuse for personal responsibility. Well, probably the biggest historical kind of events that really shakes out this kind of principle is probably World War II, when people who participated in atrocities were not excused by the fact that they followed the rules and laws of the country. And because you still have personal responsibility. But you can think about it, it's not always on that kind of very strong and kind of very dramatic levels. You still have personal responsibility. It doesn't matter, it's a democratically accepted, not democratically accepted, you're responsible. And there is a Russian philosopher of dialogism, Bakhtin, and not only dialogism, I would say, who put a very strong statement about that, which is a formal almost, not formal, but a statement about personal statement, which it says, I don't have alibi in being. In other words, nothing excuses you, nothing. You can say even the fact that you're forced to do something by somebody or by circumstances or by nature, you still, that's not an alibi from his point of view. Okay, so this is, and you can see that these two things this first thing about democratic principle of subordination to the disagreeable but democratically accepted decision or rule, going on collision with the personal responsibility. Because personal responsibility calls you, it doesn't matter. Okay. On another hand, of course, if you think about it, and this is probably I need to add another point, maybe there, that following like this personal responsibility can also lead to corruption, because you always call this is my personal responsibility, and that's why I'm following whatever I think is right. Well, it can lead to sometimes to corruption. So this. Democratic principles also leads to corruption. We think about that, and this one also can lead to corruption. So I found it very interesting in these special issues that Anna and Brazilian scholar Anna, what's her name?
Eliane Azari.
Eliane Azari. Sorry, well, forgetting that. Eliane Azari and Anna, they're working on, there is an interview with Jim Ritmoodle. And Jim Ritmoodle, he is a founder and of this democratic school that called the Circle School, which is located in Pennsylvania nearby Harrisburg. And there is a quote from that interview that will be published. You see, I put in press that will be published hopefully in January. So the quote is, from him, we wouldn't tolerate or we don't want to tolerate civil disobedience in the sense, in that sense, but those policies don't dictate interactions. That's, for me, it's interesting that he kind of deny civil disobedience. And by the way, the second principle about personal responsibility pushes for a civil disobedience, which is I'm going to discuss in a moment. And so this is where I start thinking about this issue of the civil disobedience as affirmation of the personal responsibility and democratic education. Is it like civic disobedience exists because its regimes are not democratic, and that's why there is civic disobedience, or civic disobedience has to be acknowledged everywhere, including in democratic education and in democracy? So what is civic disobedience? And I look at the civil disobedience, and I look at the different sources about that. I'm still studying, and maybe you have you can add that. So it's intentional violation of democratically established rules and decisions based, and this is I need to add, based on the strong convictions. This I need to add, based on strong convictions. It's very important that it's non-violent at the same time, despite it says violation, but it's not violent. In terms of it's not using violence as a means of this disobedience. And it could be two types from my point of view and observations. It's a private hidden, so you're not announcing very openly, I'm engaged in civil disobedience. Or it could be public, open. So it could be private or it could be public. So this is what I'm start thinking about the reasons for civil disobedience. So one very strong reason for that, when people think that democratically accepted decisions, rules, and whatever just immoral from the person's point of view, the participant's point of view, they're completely immoral, has to be violated. Let me provide maybe kind of examples. Democracy can be sometimes can be called illiberal democracy, or it can become a liberal democracy. And illiberal democracy, when let me give example. Ancient Greek and Athenian democracy was extremely illiberal, very liberal. It was much more illiberal than autocracies that exist around it. Like one of the examples of how that democracy was illiberal. First of all, it has, of course, slavery, but at that time, slavery was not a surprise for many societies at that time. But what was a huge surprise, it was absolutely oppression of women. Like, for example, in public places, women's actually has to be covered, their face has to be covered. Some people think it's coming from Islam. It's not true. This kind of practices existed before that. Women could not own property. Women could not appear themselves in public places without being chaperoned, and so on and so forth. Actually, there is a very famous historical event that when Roman Republic, which was much liberal than Athenian democracy, took over Athenian democracy, occupied. They had high respect after this achievement of Athenian democracy. But nevertheless, it's what's happened, they changed their mind. And why they changed their mind? Because of this illiberal attitudes towards women. There was a celebration of this, not celebration, well, kind of, yeah, for Romans, it was celebration of occupation of Athens. And the general of Roman general was invited by important people in Athens, and they noticed that there is no women there, because again, in Athens, you will not bring women to the party. And that's like, where is the women? Where's your wife? And it was misinterpreted by the host that they wanted like wives as like, I don't know, concubines or rape them or whatever. And they started revolt. And Romans subdued that revolt. But after that, when they learned the reasons why what's happened, they stopped respecting Greeks so high as they respected before. So this kind of idea that democracy can be extremely moral and illiberal are very kind of important things. And you might want to go against like majority or the democratically accepted rules and ideas because you feel that they violated your morality, or morality, not your morality, but morality in general. So that's one thing. Another issue is urgency and insensitivity to local and immediate context. So although the rules of democratically accepted rules can be very good in general, specifically in specific circumstances, it could be a very bad idea. Just because of urgency. Like, for example, if the cases are known, like in United States, I've heard this case, like there was a woman who was giving her labor started. She was pregnant at the labor started. It was late night and she started bleeding, and her husband get on the car, put his wife in the car, and was like driving without respect to violation of the traffic laws. Crossing on the red light because it was urgency. And when it was stopped by police, actually police approved that, and they just joined that and to provide the safety of the car. But the traffic rules were violated. And that's important. And again, that's not because the traffic rules in general are bad, but because of the emergency requirement. Sometimes it's in violation of the spirit of the enterprise. It could be because like democracy going against the spirit of why we are actually together. Like, for example, in a democratic school, they might do something that violates self-education. Let me give an example. Like Jim likes to, this is Jim Rismudo. They try to talk about like cleaning after your mess. Like if you do some activity, you need to clean after yourself, which sounds very reasonable things. But there are certain things sometimes required for students to work several days on that. And it's going against, at that time, rules of the community. And you might say, well, you can change those rules. But imagine that you're working on the project. It takes time to change the rules of the community, to appeal to that, and so on and so forth. And for what you're doing right now, you don't have that time. And so you can choose either between a violation of the rules that you think violate the spirit of why we're together, or trying to like violate what you're doing at that moment, which is the spirit, exactly what you're doing of self-education, and follow the rules, just because the rules are accepted and it takes time to change them. Another thing is about this illiberal thing. That's almost like I use examples of immorality. But immorality can come from different things, but this is tyranny of majority. You have sometimes special interests, and your special interests have to be respected. And they're not in democracy. They're not. Nobody guarantees that it will be respected. That's why there are some mechanisms to do that. But that mechanism, like for example, constitution might protect rights of minorities. But constitution is not easy to establish constitution or change constitution. That's the reason why it's called constitution. So the tyranny of majority is real threat that might require can be reason for civil disobedience. Another thing, of course, abuse and corruption. It's too bad that Dina Zaretsky is not there, because she, unfortunately, as a student, was witness. It was not democratic exactly school, but a very progressive school in Russia, where for 30 years that sexual abuse existed. And part of that, it was abuse of the both authority and certain rules and so on and so forth, and spirit and culture of the community, and that abuse and corruption can be part of this. And you need to, like, in order to resist that, you have to break sometimes rules and culture in order to fight this abuse. And again, in other things, it's injustice, which is again, they related that, but you say they have like different flavor of this kind of thing. It's very interesting. In actually talking about Athens, in Athens society, that's interesting lesson. I was visiting Agora, where Socrates talked, and it was a marketplace, and it was a place when there is art existed, and also it's a place where Athenian democracy, where they make decisions, they govern. There was a governance there, but part of that there was a court there, and there was a special judges. They were on duty 24 hours a day. They have to live there. Why? Because this exactly because Greeks actually recognize that sometimes you need to suspend certain rules. You need to have emergency of suspension, rules and laws, because you don't have time to make decisions, democratic decisions. And sometimes because of emergency, there are special judges who listen the case, appeal the case, and they say, this time we suspend that rule until we make a really careful consideration. But right now, it's okay to violate the rule. It's okay to do that. And that mechanism, as far as I know, doesn't exist in democratic schools that I observed, that existed in Greek democracy. And that's another reason for civil disobedience. There is another thing which is clearly, that's what interesting, because I don't know any school, democratic school, where this issue is discussed about the discourse about civil disobedience. When it's happened, why to do that? What our response to that should be? Is it illegal to do that? Like, it's interesting to ask Jim about this. I'm planning to do that, Jim Rickmudo, whether or not they have discussions in the school about civil disobedience. Like, he claiming that it's not, they don't want it. But do they have discussion on that? Anna, you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I think that kind of a talk sometimes appears within judicial committees because, of course, judicial committees in the democratic school are about breaking laws and what we're going to do. But it's not specifically, we don't know. But I think the topic appears in some camouflaged way because it has to.
Yeah, but when it's a camouflage way, it means no, because this is not what I mean. I mean, when I school discourse, I mean public discourse.
Talk, yeah, we should ask him.
Private discourse about that. That's important. Of course, privately, that I think that's you're absolutely right. It's in underground. It might exist, and. I'm actually claiming that it's always that civil disobedience exists all the time, everywhere. It's an inescapable thing. This is my suspicion, but I don't have proof of that. But the question is it suppressed and not recognized, not legitimatized, not recognized? And that's the question is. And this could be interesting if you feel free, you have link, and Mariam, I will send that link in a moment again. Feel free to add if you have other reasons for civil disobedience, to kind of reasons for civil disobedience, the existence of them, even in democratic society. Because my feeling is that some people, and maybe Jim like that, I don't know. It's really interesting to ask them, which I'm going to do that. That some people in democratic education think that you don't need civil disobedience because you can change the laws. Anyone can try to change their things. Everyone has a voice. You don't need to have that. If you convince other people, we can change that. That's one thing. And another thing, kind of we're good people and we like have a good will so we're kind of nice, and democracy create nice people. So we don't need that. So in a way, it's more or less good. When it's not good, we can change things.
And that may be true in a lot of cases, and you're hoping that the legitimacy of the democracy is that people feel that they can in fact bring about those changes, right? But I'm thinking of the tyranny of the majority, and like the civil rights movement in the United States. I think a lot of the civil rights leaders didn't want to overthrow the government, but they wanted change. And clearly the powers in that government did not want that change, but they became civilly disobedient. So there was like an incompatibility of existence. We cannot continue to have these violations of law and have a legitimate government. So something has to give.
There's also this idea is that this when in the situation you talk about, like in the United States, historical, there is also, again, I could be wrong, but there is also a sense there is something rotten in our democracy. Structurally, we have structural problems that has to be addressed. And as soon as we address structural problems, everything again, we don't need civil disobedience. In a way, civil disobedience, it's indicated there's something wrong. My alternative hypothesis, it's not true. And I try to point it out. There is a deep tension between democracy and personal responsibility, which always requires, and I showed the reasons, some reasons require that they always will emerge. Not because there is something wrong with democracy. It's just democracy cannot foresee and embrace all the circumstances. In a way, it's a mechanism, and mechanism cannot govern well organic life. That's happened immediately, here and now.
Mhm.
Right, but it has to be able to accommodate that in the sense that it will change and evolve. Otherwise, the democracy will fall apart. Right, something else will emerge. So in order for the democracy to survive, it has to tolerate some of the civil disobedience and deal with, process that civil disobedience and change. Or the circumstances that's causing the civil disobedience can also change and go away. That's also a possibility too.
Yes. And let me tell you, I know Anne wants to talk about. Let me reply quickly, and then Anna. There is, at least I know, two good examples when certain ideas of civil disobedience is institutionalized. One, of course, Athens, and another one in the United States and maybe some other countries, when you can actually, there is a law, and you can actually appeal to the judges and say, this is illegal law in a way. And judges can make a decision to suspend the law until they can say, because there is emergency, sense of also emergency when we show that law will harm so much. And that's why we cannot go back to the legislature and change the law that way. We need to really immediately consider, that's one thing. Another thing is Athens. In Athens, it's really interesting. Appeal to against the law and the rules and the governance. It's not coming because it's illegal, but it's interesting. There could be many different reasons why. And the judges who are on duty for 24 hours, they listen to that and they make the decision to suspend whatever it is right now going on and to start the whole process again. Not because it's illegal, not necessarily because it's illegal, but because there is some other urgency, something that may not foreseen by this law or rule. It's not about only legality, which is only in the United States. It's only about legality. So I don't know any other, maybe some people know about some other ways that it's actually civil disobedience is institutionalized in some form or accepted in some form. Even right now in the military, they say it's okay not to follow illegal orders, but they say it's about legality. Only one reason for that is about legality. and not about. There is also some kind of acceptance about consciousness, that's why you're not going to serve in the military and so on and so forth. But it's already still not. Things are legalized, so they are not civil disobedience anymore. Okay, Anna.
I think that this also, and this is my always really new discovery in the several last years about the inbuilt tensions in the value system, that you cannot have a harmonious value system. That's Isaiah Berlin, that there is a plurality of ethical principles, and some of them are contradictory to each other, and there is nothing you can do about it. It just, you have to resolve in a particular situation, let's say like with the woman who is pregnant and having to be taken quickly into the hospital, which is not even an ethical thing. But I think a lot of court appeals about individual cases is to see which one of the values is going to predominate in that case. But it's on the level of that case, like whether we'll have mercy and not kill somebody who is a villain, or do we seek kind of like real justice, like that they deserve to be put on the death row for the atrocities that they did. And so you always have to sacrifice one value to another. There is no middle way. It's really either or. And what we are talking now about civil disobedience is the same thing, I think, on a higher level, because it's on the level of principles, not about only level of the individual cases. And so if you want to say, like, what are kind of like potential reasons for civil disobedience, only one of them is this urgency of insensitivity to the local immediate context. But I think it's a built-in in the system that there will always be something that is going to counter whatever the rules and laws are brought in a whatever community or society. So it's just expected. Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, I immediately added this point there. Thanks, Anna. And again, Maria, I'm just sending for you the link to that slideshow, so everybody can write on that. So feel free to do that. Okay. So the next thing that I was thinking about, and that may be people who are familiar. So this is a possible solutions of this how to say that, unavoidability of civil disobedience. So one possible solution is legitimation of civic disobedience in democracy. One good example, and I think this is the Athenian democracy when there was judges on duty in 24 hours. You have to come to them and make a case, and if they feel it's a reasonable case, they suspend immediately. So in a way, you will be not punished for violation of the democratically accepted rules, laws, and decisions, and so on and so forth. It has plus and minuses. One of the problems is, what if you don't convince them? You still, the principle of personal responsibility is still there. And so in a way, it is, nevertheless, it is kind of interesting mechanism that allows certain things, but it has limitations. Also, it has...
Sorry to cut you. I'm thinking about people who don't want to pay taxes because they disagree with the politics, let's say, and don't want their money to go to a military or something. And to what extent that can be legitimized, because you cannot make a law against your law that everybody has to pay taxes, no matter.
And this is the problem. Is also another reason, things that you mentioned, Anna, how much we can be governed by rules and laws. That's another interesting question. Limitations of that. On the other hand, it's an opposite things. It can be corruption because we're not paying taxes and we need common resources and you disagree with that, and somebody disagree with that, it becomes a chaos very quickly. Okay. So another interesting things, possible solutions I was thinking about, this anonymous surveying participants in democratic schools for hidden and open cases of civic disobedience. Why to do that? Because in a way it opens up possibility for dialogue. Because right now it's invisible, especially when it's not done openly. And when it's not done openly, you might know about your particular case, but you don't know other cases, and you don't know how prevalent it is in the places because it's suppressed. Creation of public discussions and law on civic disobedience, discussion when it's legitimate, when it's illegitimate, bring different cases, collection of these cases, like you start, Anna, doing that. What about people who not paying taxes? What about people who do not want to provide women sell morning after pills for women who want to terminate their abort of their pregnancy, even potential pregnancy, because they might not even know that they're pregnant, but they suspect that might get pregnant. And some people doing on the religious and moral grounds. What about these cases? We're talking about outside of democratic school in broader society. That's the point.
Even
in democratic schools, because I don't know about that. Anna, what do you say?
Even the doctors who who perform illegal abortions or whatever is illegal in the country, but for the good of the patient, it doesn't have to be only abortion, or euthanasia.
But again, it's interesting in democratic. This is what's interesting because I don't have examples in democratic schools of these cases because I don't know them. I have suspicion they exist. It's just again they suppressed.
This would be fantastic research. For instance, I had very many doubts when I visited the democratic school in Hadera, which is the oldest one in Israel and the biggest one. It's over 750 students. And there is one part of that school which is almost like hidden from everybody else. And that is the Democratic School of Hadera agreed to house really severely mentally retarded children, and they are part of that school, but they are not really part. They are secluded from everybody else. They don't play with everybody else. Nobody can go in there where they are housed, and so it is, kind of like a very thing. I don't know what children they are talking about, that part of the school and those other children and things like that.
Like interesting educational examples. It's not democratic education, I would say. Vivian Powell, she's unfortunately she died a few years ago. She was absolutely marvelous preschool educator. Very interesting. I would call her progressive, not democratic. And it's interesting because she considered democracy, but always rejected it in form of her authoritarian rules. And paternalism. And again, she tried to justify her paternalism. It's not like she's not justified. She tried to justify. But anyway, let me give an interesting example. She wrote about that in wonderful book. Highly recommend that book. You cannot say, you cannot play. And in that, she created rules, which is not democratic rule, that forcing on kids that the kids has to accept everyone in playing. You cannot just not to accept. And the kids resisted that through the civil disobedience by creating extremely funny situations, like if there's kid with whom they don't want to play, they created a special role for the kid, which is basically means that they're not playing. Like, for example, you are a fish, and or you are a
was not Vivian Paley. It's an example that I brought. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's not the point. She has her own point. It's not only her who described that, but she described. It doesn't matter particular, but you got the idea. It's kind of creating this subversive ideas of how to make civil disobedience within kind of without being visible in a way, because you're following the rule, but in a way it's following the rule, which is you're not following the rule. You disobey to that rule. So anyway, that's yes. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Okay, so let's. Another thing is creation of traditional body, special on duty for immediate suspense of problematic rules and decisions, however democratically elected. This is like Athenian kind of Athenian approach. Institutionalization, a special institution for dealing with civil disobedience, which is recognized and recognized as legitimate. And by the way, it's done not on the legal grounds, on any grounds on this. Another interesting things, which is not exactly dealing with civil disobedience, but it's trying to remedy this kind of things, is creating some protection for minorities, like Bill of Rights, which is actually non-democratic necessarily, in the sense that it's about minorities, not about majority in democracy. But it is kind of institutional solution that limiting democracy. The problem is it's very rigid and it's very difficult to change something about that, of course. But nevertheless, it exists.
I think it raises an interesting question about democracy too, and the idea of liberalism, because liberalism, it seems to me, is about the diversity of voices.
Yeah.
And that in a democracy, I mean, we're infinitely different, right?
Yeah.
So we're all minorities in many different ways. So it almost seems that, sure, it's not necessarily a majority thing, but at the same time, it's almost an absolutely necessary part of democracies, it seems.
Well, there is an interesting relation between democracy and liberalism, and there is a wonderful book about that. I think Farouk Zahari, I might not pronounce his name correctly. People who knows him, please correct me. Farouk Zahari, he wrote about issues of liberal and illiberal democracy, and so democracy can be liberal and liberalism can be undemocratic. I think his particular example, if I'm not mistaken, was Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was, in comparison with many other, including democracies, was much more liberal than the democracies that existed at that time. But it was empire. There was emperor there, so it was not democracy whatsoever. Nonetheless, it was very liberal. And there was a lot of examples, including Athenian democracy was super illiberal in many ways. It was kind of, you couldn't say categorically about everything, but it has many realms. What was in that time, in comparison to its own time, was very illiberal. And like Roman Empire, when it was stopped being a republic, was very liberal. In many, again, in comparison, that's all. Like again, there was interesting historian who make a point about like women specifically, that Roman Empire, position of women in the Roman Empire remains most liberal and most free and most just up to almost the end of 19th century in Europe, if you take only Europe as a place for consideration. So it was very, in terms of like women's rights, it was most liberal place, while it was empire, and it was non-democratic governments there. So it's very interesting connection between that. And I think this, it's very important, I think, point that Brian, you mentioned, that in a way, this idea of personal responsibility is probably, it's a strong liberal principle. It's where liberalism is probably at its very extreme, I would say, when each person makes own decisions about their own life. another possibility solution, what I'm thinking about that, and again, feel free to add more. And I don't know if it's about exactly what Anna, you start talking about this. It's whatever somebody noticed kind of that civil disobedience, it will be reported to the judicial committee. But judicial committee should have right to overrule democratically accepted rules in this particular case. It's not about in all cases, although it might make recommendations to change the laws as well and rules, but it might also excuse people. And it might actually, there's interesting possibility punish and excuse. Not also, it can be punish or excuse or punish and excuse. It kind of reminds me, I think, Victor Hugo, like a story about a person who was punished and executed. Rewarded and executed. I think it was on the ship. There was a person who was responsible for a cannon, and the cannon get loose during the storm, and threatened to injure a lot of people and kill even because it get loose and start moving around. And the person who was responsible for that cannon did absolutely bravely, heroic actions to stop that and solve the problem. And after that, captain awarded and then executed him, awarded for heroism and executed for neglect. And the whole thing related to that. In a way, it can be what punishment and excuse for anyone altogether. They can come together or can be separate. It can be excused completely. So it's interesting, but it can be done through the judicial committee with acceptance of the civil disobedience. Of course, it could be banning and punishment of the civil disobedience, so elimination of civil disability or suppressing. I would say it will never be eliminated, it will be only suppressed for this kind of action. And I think my feeling that it more or less exists right now in many democratic schools because they do not accept as or don't want civil disobedience. Maybe others. Okay, there is something that I skipped, and I feel that I skipped. Yes, the one thing that I really would like to ask to think about, if it's possible. Do you know any cases, known cases about civil disobedience in democratic education by students or by staff? I know I'm heavily involved in civil disobedience, of course, but it's kind of different one because I'm embedded in very conventional institutions, so I do a lot of civil disobedience against that institution. But the question is, it's interesting, and I can tell many stories about that, but which is dangerous, by the way, for me to tell, of course. But I'm more interested about civil disobedience within things, and this is very, very, very interesting.
Eugene, just for the sake of your document and people may be looking at in the future, can I address some of your Russian English?
Yeah.
Go back to that last slide we were just at. I think what you're trying to ask is what cases of civil disobedience have you observed?
Yes. You know what? This is not so much even my Russian English. It's become so long. The text becomes so long and so big. I try to abbreviate that, but okay.
So what cases?
Why does that right on this? Yeah. No, just what cases of civil? Right. Right. No, this is Russian English, or maybe not Russian.
So what? Get rid of the have, the what have. Get rid of that have. And then go back to have you observed?
Right. Okay, now I got it. Yeah, that's the Russian.
Yeah, and I think you have an extra space before have.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me that maybe it opens up, people will start writing. I need to do more grammatical mistakes in everything, so people it will keep people right on this slides. I don't know, quickly anecdote. In Soviet Union, I created together with my colleagues as a teacher international movie festival. It was part of the Moscow festival, and we created for the children when children were jury awarded great movies, including like people like Fellini went there and many others. So anyway, one thing that I wanted is to during the movie was shown with the breaks. So the movie was running all the days. There's like I don't know how many movies were, maybe 5 movies a day, and there were breaks between the movies. Some of them breaks for lunch, some just breaks like maybe 20-30 minutes. And what I wanted, it was a big kind of lobby there, like a hall when people having this recess time. And what I did, I put a huge piece of paper on the wall, and I wanted people to write their impressions about the movies. And nobody did. There was markers, big paper, nobody did this. Then I tried to model them. I wrote myself. People read that, nobody, they discussed that, what I wrote, but nobody will write themselves. Then I tried to write absolutely outrageous things like Fellini is a terrible movie director or something like that. People read that, discussed me how much an idiot and something like that. Nobody really, but then I found the way. I wrote things with grammatical mistakes. People couldn't handle that. They start taking markers and start correcting that, and they start writing after that. So this is the power of having grammatical mistakes. People cannot stand that. Okay, Melissa, sorry.
Yeah, I just I'll have to go in about 15 minutes, but I had a few different comments that you prompted. So thank you so much for these provocations. Let's see. So one thing I was thinking about is somewhere, but I don't remember where, Danny Greenberg wrote an essay about, and within the essay, he describes a block of students at the Sudbury Valley School who were discontented. They felt like their voices weren't heard, but when Danny would talk with them about it, he would say, well, come to the school meeting, you have to make a good argument, and they didn't feel, they felt like they had done that. I hope I'm remembering this right, that they had done that and it didn't work, and so the kind of impression I got is sort of like, you have to be persuasive enough. You've got to come in here and you've got to convince people to do things the way you want to do them. Otherwise, it's on you. It's your personal responsibility. And I feel like my my approach has been different in that I try to invite disagreement. I would say, like I try to invite opinions that are that maybe are against kind of the way a conversation is going, and I ask for people to disagree sometimes at school meeting, and or I might disagree myself just to kind of bring that kind of sense that it's okay to disagree and to have differences of opinion. But I will also say, I think the size of the school makes a big difference. I think at our school, at least, we sort of have this understanding in this culture that if a rule doesn't work, we'll just revisit it in a week, in 3 weeks, in a year. We can change the rule at any time. So I think because of that, there's less of a need, perhaps, for civil disobedience. Although I really appreciate your point of like what's going on, sort of behind the scenes or like not awareness of everybody else. But it seems like usually if somebody's doing something against the rules, it surfaces. It doesn't last for too long. And I think that might be because of the size of our school. I was also thinking about schools that are based on anarchy instead of democracy. I'm curious about them. I don't know that much about them, but I know there was the modern school movement back in the day. And I was also thinking about Windsor House in Canada, in Vancouver. I don't know if they're still open, but they were open for many years. And I talked with one of the founders, and she said that they didn't really keep a law book. And I thought, how can you have a democratic school and not keep a law book? You have to keep all these laws written down, and you have to, and she's like, no, we just sort of go on memory. And if we don't remember a rule, it must be because it wasn't a very good rule. And so that's okay that we don't have that rule anymore. And we just go, go from what we think right now. And so that kind of more openness was, fascinating to me, because I thought everything needs to be written down and you have to keep track of everything. And they had a lot more kind of flexible perspective about it. So so those are just a few of the thoughts I wanted to share, listening to what you said.
Yes, if you can remember where you read about this case, something that, but exactly it shows the problem with democracy, because I would conceptualize it's exactly tyranny of majority. Because if there is, and also another things, refer what Anna talked about Berlin, that values, there is incompatible values, what I call good values, incompatible good values. And especially if they're unevenly distributed, there is no way you can solve this problem by persuasion. Because this idea of persuasion implies that people in general are mutually replaceable. At some point, that person, you can get to that person. And that's a very questionable whether or not you can get to that person or not, ever. That's one thing. Another thing, it also implies kind of that we're timeless. It doesn't matter. It will happen in 3 weeks or in a year from now. But we're not timeless. We're living, the time is important. When it's happened in 3 weeks, it's not, it means sometimes there is urgency in the things that happen. Or it means that maybe it happened, maybe you can get in 3 years, but 3 years in especially children's life, it's a huge time.
6 months is a huge time.
Yes. And so this idea that, we always can solve it through the democracy, this, you see, this is kind of, in my view, it's illusion. Democracy has its limits, and that's one of them. It has its strength, but it has its weaknesses. It's one of them. And there is constant, in my view, this ideology, democratic ideology, that democracy, you can, it's self-improving process, it's self-correcting process. That's why it can solve any problem. No, it can't. Yeah. There is tensions that embedded in democracy. It doesn't matter what rules you will take. It doesn't matter what procedures you will take. It's just in this holy grail that there is some kind of a way of organizing us when we can seamlessly solve the problems through the democracy is wrong. There are certain things you cannot solve through democracy.
Well, I think that kind of speaks to the idea that it's a social contract, that if you come to school like this, you're accepting the social contract that we're going to be making rules democratically, and you can either, go along with rules, even if you disagree with them, and change them if you can, or go somewhere else. You don't have to be a part of this community.
I think this is, in my view, this is utopia, which doesn't exist.
Right.
There is certain things put under the rug. By the way, in Danny Greenberg is also what they're doing, in my view. It's not only Danny Greenberg, moralizing of that. It's your problem. No, it's not your problem. It's a problem of the democracy, which cannot be resolved. You see, anything, the problem is what I call it democratic totalitarianism. which is the idea that it's total, it doesn't have limitations.
Right.
And you can resolve any problem through the democratic process. You cannot.
Right.
Yes.
And
Anna.
I think usually of metaphor of the Eastern Island, you know, like there is a limit to how much we can separate from each other. So certain things you cannot move away, like when it comes to the environment or whatever. So if you're thinking in a school from which you can move away, the question is, I think that what you said, there are some hidden and private problems and some then open and you can discuss them. And I think, of course, discussing them is not a solution, but it's a one step of figuring out for everyone how to live still together in the face of these disagreements. And so even without a solution, which you know that ultimately you cannot find solution for everything, but you can kind of try to bring everything out. Especially, I think, in education, where it has to, these kinds of things have to be discussed no matter how, and not just say, okay, you can just leave the community, goodbye. Of course, sometimes for the sake of community, you have to get somebody out there, and that's, but all of that I still think have to be discussed. That the only kind of like general recommendation, I think, for education should be, and that also is questionable, how much you can discuss that in different, with different people. And I'm now thinking again of going deeper into early childhood education, because I do think that they, in certain ways, present specific problems for educators and for democracy in education because of the need to protect them. Is it the need? Where is the boundary of that, and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I just definitely agree. It's we have to figure out how can we learn to live together, you know, despite the fact that we all have competing you know, interests at times. And it's a balance between the community, what the community needs and wants, and what each individual needs and wants. And there is no utopia. This is just one way, and I think a way of maybe a fairly effective and productive way of resolving, or at least
Right.
addressing, you know, all these differences.
There is a one thing that I kind of like in this special issue that Eugene mentioned a couple of times. I have a big study about a democratic school in that was organized in Oslo in 1967, and a very combustive meeting they had about 2 months after there, where they could probably, the school could have broken right away at that time, 2 months after they started. And this 4-hour big meeting that I studied for more than 3 years, I think, but I without talking to more people personally there, and I think that one reason they was able to stay together as a school is because they could change their antagonisms and absolute complete disagreement about almost everything into a dialogue in which they could respect each other's opinions, even in the face of big disappointments in each other, big disagreements with each other. But they could say that, okay, somehow they didn't say we can live with this, but they just abandoned abandoned at the end of the meeting. They didn't have any resolutions, but they just were able to live together after that, and make many decisions and last for more than 25 years as a school. Of course, with a lot of many disagreements that they had from the beginning as to how to run the school, what's possible, what's not possible, what's just, what's not just. that I think that turning the disagreements and antagonisms into this agonistic dialogue is something very important, because it can bring some people into just kind of seeing other people as people and not just as idiots and not just as the other. Even if you don't have to agree with them in anything, but it just becomes part of your family in a sense, like you have a mad uncle and you cannot do anything about that, but he's still your uncle. You know?
Yes, and also a kind of, it's not only about just moving away. This is the problem is, in my view, this expectation that it's possible to live the life that people discuss as democracy is illusion, in my view. It's just unwilling to acknowledge that civil disobedience constantly present. It just make it illegitimate, and it's put on the ground. And sometimes, of course, people know about it, and then they punish and moralize about that.
Mhm.
And in my view, it's more honest way is to acknowledge that and to start considering what to do about that. I'm not saying that civil disobedience has to be accepted as like, okay, any person, in this case, well, democracy will collapse, obviously. Because if each person will do only what they agree to do, that although other people, which are affecting other people's life, that's impossible to do. It will lead to the either people, as Minister you legitimately say, will has to divorce from each other. That's one possibility, and another one, it's a war. At the end, it will be violence, because people will step on the other people's freedoms and rights and so on and so forth, and that will lead to not even anarchy. I would say it would lead to violence, pure violence. It's the question is again how to deal with the civil disobedience, rather than not to say that we don't want that and we're close to for that.
Eugene, it's this idea of legitimate. That's an interesting word to me. What do you mean by?
Can I say I would call it meta legitimacy, not legitimacy, but meta legitimacy. Do you see what the difference is? It's not like I say civil disobedience always has to be legitimate. No, I'm saying that meta legitimacy, that sometimes it has to be dealt with that as fact of life. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's terrible.
And sometimes the sense we make of what, when we look back and we say, well, we see that as legitimate now. But, our views of these things change.
Yeah, by Minister, it's too bad, yeah. So it's interesting. Since you, Amy, and Brian, at least you participated in democratic classes, at least as a students, at least in mine. Do you remember any cases of civil disobedience, or maybe you were involved in civil disobedience?
In the class themselves, in the democratic classes.
Yeah.
Well,
let me tell you that, for example, where I don't know how much it's civil disobedience or something, but it could be like people, for example, agree, let's say students, some of my students, they agree, let's say I had a class just in the fall semester when this web talk forum did not work at all. Many things work beautifully in that class, much more than in many other classes. But one thing that didn't work spectacular, in my view, was web talk. which basically what it was, the students really, kind of felt, in my view, based on what they wrote, that it was kind of imposed assignment on them, and they were doing something like the entry on this forum, WebTalk forum, online WebTalk forum, was like that. It was a great class. We had a great class. Or I like, or I'm looking forward for the next class. That's the end. You know what? We discussed that. We discussed that in our class in the middle of the semester, and we decided, we all agree that the WebTalk, it's not like my impression that it didn't work. Everybody see that it didn't work. So what we decided to make it as a whole community, we decided to make it voluntarily. People who want to participate will participate. But strange enough, there is quite a number of students, majority, let's say, continue participating in that shallow way. And it's, for me, it's not even civil disobedience. It's more like, I don't know how to call that. Like, I don't know why they were doing that.
I wonder if it's a sort of disengagement, like if they don't totally buy in or agree, that they just kind of disconnect. And
my reason, like why they couldn't participate on web. I think they like participate on as idea, but they couldn't because I have these students for whom it's very difficult to form their opinion about anything. It's very interesting. We did it beautifully in the class, but it requires the whole class discussion to do that, and they enjoy that and they love that. Mm-hmm. But when they remain by themselves in kind of think like, what do you think about this? I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. I never thought about that. Like if you ask me, like Amy, what do you think about colors of the planets or color of the stars? I thought about that. Like, well, what about that? It may be something interesting about that, but I don't know. So, yeah. I have an opinion. Like, I'm interested to hear what you say. That's right. So this is what they write about. Like, I'm looking forward for the next class. We're going to do that. I'm looking forward about this class.
I wonder if also there's a sense in traditional education of like there being a right answer and people being fearful of, not being smart or not being, accepted by the community by giving the wrong answer. I don't know.
No, of course. But for me, that's not the case of civil disobedience in a way, because
right.
Yeah, I would see much more civil disobedience if they, let me tell you what for me will be evidence in that particular case of civil disobedience. If before we make the decision, they participated in a shallow way, after we decided that it's voluntarily, they completely dropped from participation. In this case, I say, they were just doing that because, they were disagreeing with that or not able to do that, whatever. And then they were participating in a shallow way. They kind of, as if they kind of agree with that, but they actually were disagreeing with it. Yeah. That was not the case.
Yeah, that's very unusual. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. But I think
you're probably right in the case that they were not in the position to do anything when they were not together. They were not there yet. They for many reasons, the community, it's not only the individually, the kind of community, there was nobody there except maybe you, but you're in a different position to kind of stir something for them, by them, for themselves. Sometimes you have one or two students and then they kind of lead because they are interesting, they throw in things, and then other students kind of can latch on that in a certain way. But somehow they, as a community, and you always, every class you have a, kind of random community of people thrown together, and it just didn't, there was no spark there.
No, again, we don't need to discuss that case. I'm just saying that I'm trying to find cases for civil disobedience like one case, it was Brian class that he participated. It was a very interesting case. By the way, Amy, we had that, I think, case in our class as well, but it was not resolved. It was resolved in Brian's class, but not in our class. Although the problem was more or less the same in my judgment. Let me give what the situation was. In one of the classes that Brian took, actually it was similar class, Amy, that you took. Although at that time it has a different title of the class.
I'm thinking,
So,
Eugene.
Anna, just let me finish.
Okay. Sorry.
So the situation was like that. In Brian class, we had, it was a rather big class, which is, Amy, like yours, maybe a little bit bigger. And at some point, there was two students were from two paradigms coming there. One paradigm was information processing, the people like computers, basically. And another one was sociocultural. And there was third group in between who were kind of undecisive about that. What's happened was that this paradigm, information processing paradigm, was slightly bigger in number than sociocultural paradigm. So they systematically were choosing topics that sociocultural people were less interested. So what happened was, at some point, or a student from the sociocultural program came to me and told that she's not going to come to classes anymore because she's very frustrated with that. She's not interested in kind of this. There were discussions there, but she said she wants to study something else. We had the discussion in the class. I brought to the class, and some students proposed, like, we should study whatever we want to study. Each person should study whatever we want to study, which is kind of breaking the class almost. And I was thinking how to organize that. I sent them email about that, how we will do that. And the students actually didn't like that. What they came to the in-class solution was actually having two classes in one class. And so each group selected their own topic. And they organized a leader of the class within that group, because I cannot be with them, or I can come to them to the. And it worked pretty well. Also, they wanted to have 20 minutes at the end of the class, so we'll discuss what was discussed in the groups. And later they increased it, I think, to 30 minutes based on our email discussions. So that was an interesting situation. In your class, we have the similar situation. But I think I made a mistake in that class because I saw that, but I should have bring this to the class attention. And we can discuss like what's happened in the previous, in Brian's your class. Remember Sherry was talking about, who came to me and said she was not going to class anymore. So it will be very interesting what solution we would come with. Again, the problem here, it's almost like back to the conversation that Melissa had. It's almost like democracy solved that problem. We solved the problem for democracy, not for civil disobedience. In Brian's class. In our class, that's very interesting how people felt in our class and what they tried to do. Because Amy, would you agree that we had these two paradigms? Actually?
Oh, absolutely. That's been one of my big frustrations just with coming back to college after 20 years away, is seeing the paradigm shift and seeing, maybe it's just in the department that I was in, but seeing what's valued and what's not valued and whose research is taken up and what we talk about, and kind of the power hierarchy within that as well. And then even just kind of getting a feel for that with people and with other graduate students, and seeing it seems that there's value in those paradigms coming together and having conversation and acceptance and learning, but it seems like there's more of a, I don't know, maybe an unwillingness to do that. Like, mine's right. No, mine's right. So yeah, I would agree. Definitely in our class, you could feel it too. I just like reading the room and seeing people's faces and how accepting they were in having some control over what they were learning. rather than being told what they had to learn, I think caused some discomfort. You could sense it from certain people based on what they believed.
And in my view, and again, this is what mistakes I think I did, because I saw that. It's not like I didn't. If I didn't, it would be also a mistake, but much more forgivable for me. But I saw that, and somehow what I waited in a way, Cherie, was somebody will say, like, we cannot live like that. But
I should have been braver.
Yeah. You know why? Because sociocultural paradigm in this particular case was much less assertive. People, they were assertive, like Brian was very assertive. He was kind of big, but it was not assertive in a way we're not subordinate to that. Like people like you, Amy, again, you might say that I'm wrong and objectivizing you, but I think you will almost accept that they have more legitimacy than us. So we kind of need to adjust somehow to them and listen to the, like we need to follow them, maybe not completely, but we need to compromise with them. By the way, they were not willing to compromise. They were very straightforward. This is how things are, and this is it. And obviously, I really like that use word, obviously, and so on and so forth. And people, socioculture people more adjusting to that.
Eugene, I don't think it's a sense that it's legitimate. I think it's more a sense of maybe some realism in that I don't know that I'll change somebody's mind.
And in my view, no, it's funny, let me tell you. I had a group of this in class, undergraduate class, and I have also paradigm difference. And this time, by the way, I'm thinking, I actually brought that, but it was much easier with that class because it was physical separation. Because, the students initially sit in different places and then they separated from each other. And one was sitting on one side of the class, another on another. Wow. When they were talking, they were like rolling eyes, like, And I call them one kind of a liberal, another conservative. At some point, you know what? This was good what I did. I asked them, how you call yourself? Do you know how conservative, what I call conservative group call themselves?
What?
Realists.
Realists.
And the other will call themselves progressive. The one who are called liberal, they will call them progressive. But I just want to tell, when we say realist, it means conservative.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but I make a mistake of not creating this discourse about this, public discourse about this paradigmatic differences. And a way of reorganizing the class based on how we want to lead our class, that both of the groups, paradigmatic groups, feel very not comfortable, but in other words, like fulfilling. Right?
I also think that, let's say, this kind of difference, people have different, not only views, but different goals in a way, because people who are looking for objective truth, they really need that certainty that there is something that they're basing their opinions on that's solid, that you can prove. It's not just opinion, and things like that, not just interpretation. And for them, taking that away from them is just hard. It's impossible, kind of like. It's just...
What kind of important things, like I remember Cherie, we were talking with her, and she made actually an interesting point. I still remember that she said something. She appreciates the other group as a challengers, whatever, but she said, I don't want constantly to be in that relationship. I want that relationship, but I also want us, like we discussing our issue among us, and I don't need to prove everything that I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I want to move forward with myself, but I also want to bring to them and see what they say, because they kind of, in a way, provide blind spot for me sometimes. Sometimes the discussion also used. That's why our class, in a way, with Brian, remember that class, we had this kind of interesting form, because there was groups discussing by themselves, so they don't need constantly to respond to each other, and we have time when we share that. So we have like classes from both kind of worlds in a way. And it's created a very nice society, I would say, not community, society as a class. Because we have the two communities and overall society when this community also had time to dialogue with each other. And not to dialogue with each other.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of the I don't know, the clunkiness of how we organize institutions and schedules and classes and things like that. Sometimes it seemed like there was two classes going on there.
And nothing wrong about that. And this is important to have when it should be two, when it should be one. And there is nothing wrong about this kind of organization. But again, it's we derail a little bit from this idea of the civil disobedience because our discussion actually suggests that it's still possible to avoid civil disobedience. And I still doubt about that. But for that, we need to get to the almost like microscopic observations and things, which is because it could happen on the level of the people's level. I had, by the way, classes when people organize their own groups outside of the class. And sometimes they came to class, sometimes they didn't come to class. And they met outside of the class. I have situations like that as well.
No, of course, but there is so much about organizing the education in general that's not necessary to be like classes instead of clubs. This idea that who is in, who is out is random. Of course, in life it's also to some degree random, but there could be all kinds of changes that could have more ways for people to put together what they want to do and how to do it. Of course, and even then, you couldn't say that it will not be civic disobedience. Right. Or if not even, I think it's not always disobedience, but kind of like a really deep disagreements. About the examples that you asked, I'm just thinking of the examples from the Summerhill, like those girls fighting about the stolen. That's a Summerhill school, Amy, in England, and there is a whole case once that some makeup was, let's say, stolen, and then it was a big process about whether it was stolen or not stolen, who gave it to whom, and they wanted to make an investigation to search. So the suggestion was and accepted that people who are not involved in this dispute, and that's mostly boys, should go and search girls' rooms to find whether they can find that. And then in 5 minutes, it became impossible because one girl said she wouldn't leave the room and she was not allowing boys to search through her private things. And many other girls and even the female teacher supported her because, there's touchy things that women have and boys don't have to see. And so that fell into but it was a very heated discussion. I don't know whether it was so-called civil disobedience. It didn't go against any rules, but it was just an ad hoc decision made. Let's do that. And then when it didn't work, then the male teacher who suggested that and the other boys who worked how to do that, then they said, well, if you don't want it discovered, then drop the case. Like, we cannot help you. And they were very offended, I think, in that sense. And the girls then decided to drop the case, but behind then in the evening, the two of them had a big talk about the injustices in the school and different privileges and older males, people having right to go to a pub in the village and some people don't, so, but it was a lot of venting about what's going on. I don't know, is it a disobedience, but definitely people felt that there were unjust rules, let's say. So it's interesting, but this whole idea that that civil rights, like a Bill of Rights, is something in a sense limiting democratically brought up laws and rules and everything, that the interest of particular groups or individuals can always push back on certain blanket decisions. That's very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are always going to be specific interests or needs that cannot be generalized.
Yeah.
Or should be. So it's I see it in a way where, like, to what extent education is a private matter, like you can do whatever you want for yourself, and to what extent is the matter of coordination with others and affects everybody else. And so when you're making rules in a school, I'm just talking about school, democratic school, not about the whole society, then what are the rules about? What spheres of life and privacy and education they cover? And that they're always going to be very interesting gray zones.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we play, like in that Vivian Paley book, like you can't say you can't play. She made a rule. You cannot, if somebody wants to play with you, you cannot tell them they can't play with you. So what if somebody needs you to study together for them and you say, no, I'm just going to do it myself? Or different variations of that. So people think sometimes of self-education as something you do for yourself, but it doesn't affect anybody, but it does. So it's not, and you depend on other people also for self-education.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating area to me.
It is. And you said, you were speaking of the classroom society, not society at large, but I think the classroom in some ways does mirror what happens in the larger society, and that you have people with very different ideas and trying to get people to live together and work together.
Right.
And so disobedience would be something that would be inevitable if one group is winning out. I guess if you have to agree on a certain way of being and you don't like it, it would happen in society, it would happen in the classroom with the various
I think of a lot of the non-democratic aspects of the classroom too, where the institution's forcing people into a class, they have to
structures
in class, they have to get graded or whatever the other institutional pressures may be.
Right.
Or to what extent is the instructor able to avoid those institutional pressures or protect their students from those institutional pressures? Instructors may have various abilities to do that.
Right. That's another whole thing. But you also work in a non-democratic institution, which is
I do, right, but I'm also able to protect my students from some of those institutional intrusions to some extent. But there again, I'm picking my battles. I've become more skillful at fighting those battles than I once was, and certainly than a new teacher would be. And I also have some professional capital and established my presence in that school in such a way that I can do that too. So.
Yeah, that's very important. But you probably also now have actually a lot of examples of these various kinds of problems during the COVID. I remember wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, getting vaccinated, not getting vaccinated, all of that affects everybody else. And then about what's the truth, what's the not truth about that, what's scientifically known or not known, and what do you believe, or all kinds of conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I felt like my high school was ground zero for that kind of stuff. The protests at the school board meetings and all the signs in the yards, and
yeah. very well. But as I said, I'm trying to go back to studying much deeper the early childhood education and on that level. And now I had two boys of 4 years or 4.5 years old, my grandson and my grandnephew, and just two of them, And so how different they are and how they feel affected by each other, even if it's not kind of for any grading. Like, it's a constant, when you're together, difference of the needs, and even if all the needs and everybody adult understands that, you compare each other to each other, like one of them can draw beautifully and the other one cannot, but the other one is much more physical, can do a lot more balance and running, so it's kind of like, what do you do about that? And kind of like, it's not even your right. I am just talking specifically about Stephen, who cannot draw well, but he's so frustrated. I mean, he cannot draw well from his point of view, comparing himself to the other one. Nobody, if he didn't have Oliver around, it wouldn't be any frustration for him, because it would be all accepted anyway. And then he becomes dissatisfied and acts out because he needs something different, but he doesn't know what he needs, so is it a question of his right to be the same or as good as the other? It's at that age, it's so much connected, it's undifferentiated where the frustration is coming from, what's actually bothering you. And for adults to actually see or examine what's bothering you at each moment, and to kind of be wise in advising or in getting the talk about what's going on. We were all in a park, and at some point Stephen started sulking, walking behind and looking down, and I asked, like, what's the matter? Are you sad? Yes. Why are you sad? And he doesn't answer, he doesn't know. He knows, but he cannot say, so I said, did somebody yell at you? And then suddenly his father says, what's bothering you? And he says, Oliver has a stick and I don't have one. And there's the sticks all around. There are no more good sticks. No, but I'm thinking in this sense of how at that age, to even get into this kind of what are the rules or laws, or whether you feel some violation or injustice about what, and kind of what's causing what. Is it a social injustice or just kind of like a life injustice or what it is? But you feel it, so it's sorting out these things. It's a very important thing for the next level, when you can say that somebody is violating your rights or rules, or you disagree, and then it's their way and not your way, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just kind of like incredible how these relationships cause.
Well, it was an interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You have a lot of examples, Brian, and I don't know much about the kind of examples you have, Amy.
Well, I don't think I have as much experience in talking about democratic education, but just examples from other things or things that I think match up. I can make some analogies and see some crossovers.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I missed most. Sorry, there's some emergency with our heater that I have to attend here. It's a good end story. They fixed it. Expensive, but fixed it. Anyway, you probably discussed examples, right?
Well, I was trying to, at the very end, go back to my questions about what to do when young age, like looking at my son and my grandson and my grandnephew, Oliver and Stephen, and when they have frustrations, they feel violated, or they violate some kind of a something, they feel injustice, whether it's like real or for them it's real. And what kind of discussions and how to even figure out what bothers them, and what you can do about that, and what you can discuss at that age in a way that people can start to sort out what even their problem is. Very interesting, and very at this point, I think needs to be thought through much deeper.
I need to get going. Sorry, Eugene. Do we have we have an education club meeting at 6?
Yes.
6
p.m. Okay. All right.
By the way, Lenny, welcome. And it doesn't have any particular topic in our Christians Club. People come and just go in the row and start saying, like, what you want to discuss.
I'll send you a very short text that I wrote for discussion tonight.
And that's, I think, that's on your Zoom, right, Eugene?
It's my Zoom. It's again at 6 o'clock. So if you're interested, you can come and see yourself how people discuss scholarship, teaching, sometimes graduate issues of the graduate, also politics, about educational politics, I would say, including a lot of discussion, by the way, civil disobedience. But not the difference is it's not in democratic context, it's in the context of conventional institution.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'm in the midst of my specialization exam and a number of things, so I may not stay for that whole meeting, but I will.
Okay, you see, this is what, for example, Brian will be hopefully bringing that and discussing his exam, and it'll be interesting.